Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome an accomplished architect from the US, Vanessa Keith. Vanessa, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Vanessa is the principal and founder of Studioteka Design and Tekamundi. So, Vanessa, my first question to you is, can you share the story behind the founding of Studioteka Design and how your journey as an architect led you to create a multidisciplinary practice?
Sure. Well, let's see. I think I was about 3 years out of school and I was teaching and and that was great and I really loved that. And so the teaching gave me um, it just gave me a window into another world. It gave me um, access to really wonderful older practitioners who could advise me in my practice. And so when I got a project, I it was a very easy transition. I mean, I got a project and I had to sort of just think quickly and just make that jump. And since I was already teaching, I had a little bit of a cushion. I had, folks that could advise me, and I just decided to. I didn't know what I was doing, but I just decided to take the leap. And I think that's like a lot of things in life, right?
Amazing, amazing. But what was the inspiration to combine architecture with economic and market research? And how do these elements influence your design process?
Well, I think, you said that I'm from the US. I mean, I was born in Jamaica.
Mhm.
I'm Jamaican, Italian, and Chinese. So I've always had a very international outlook. And actually, before I became an architect and did all of the Studioteka stuff, like some of the stuff that you see behind me is actually some of the visualization from, we're developing a virtual reality game based on my book. I've always been very concerned about issues that affect the global south, because I think we cannot only think about how issues of climate, issues of economics, issues of, I mean, it's a world system, right? And being from the global south, I was I grew tired of just standing by and watching the storm tracker as it
Mhm.
approached Jamaica and wondering what we would do. So I
Yeah.
thought there have to be solutions out there. My prior um, my prior training before becoming an architect was actually in international affairs and economic development.
Mm.
So before even becoming an architect, I was thinking about these issues and I was thinking about global supply chains and the economy and the IMF and all of these different things that impact the global South, and how we can provide more just and equitable solutions for
Mm.
people in the global South. So it was a natural fit. When I finished school,
Mhm.
I looked at the job prospects, which were good, and I thought to myself, how can I just say that I have this degree, and so I'm going to come and tell you what to do with my degree from Columbia University? I thought that that was wrong.
Mm.
And so for me, I thought I need to have like a technical skill that I can lend to this conversation about economics and all of those things. And that led me to really, I was always really interested in cities. Cities are a really interesting system. Cities have all of these things. They
Yeah.
have, the economics and all of those things that fold in. And it's really interesting to see, um, as an architect and as an urban designer, how all of those things come into play. You cannot just think about buildings as just an object. You have to think about them and how they plug into a larger human system.
Great response. Thank you. And Vanessa, how does your work with Tekamundi complement Studio Teka's designs, architectural projects?
Well, I need to tell you a longer story then.
Mhm.
So
Please.
I can tell you the story of how my book came to be, and then that will lead into Tekamundi. So in the summers after we started Studioteka, um, we would always have a little bit of a lull. And so, and actually that's not the case anymore, but in the beginning it was. And so we thought, wouldn't it be interesting to use this time that we have to explore new things, to do work that was maybe more speculative, to do design competitions, to do thinking. And so we were in the process of doing that. And we would always invite people, my colleagues from City College where I was teaching, including Michael Sorkin, to the office where we would have review presentations and we would talk about ideas. And so after one of these, Michael said, would you like to would you like to be in a design competition? Like I can tap somebody, I won this thing. And so if you are tapped by somebody, you have to be invited. So it was an honor,
Hmm.
but we had just finished one and we were exhausted. So maybe the team didn't do as good of an effort as we could have.
Hmm.
So we did win that one. And then he said, well, would you like to be a part of my book series?
Wow.
And so that was just incredible. So Michael had started an imprint called Terraform, and Terraform has a whole bunch of really interesting books. If anyone is interested in 2100, a dystopia and utopia, the city after climate change, they can go to Terraform's website, where it's available as an ebook or a physical copy.
Mhm.
Um, and so that turned into really a labor of love of looking at cities around the world with 4 degrees average warming. And what would we do? Because as I mentioned, just worrying about the storm tracker for the next cyclone or hurricane isn't really enough.
Hmm.
Um, so we picked 14 cities around the world, and we picked them based on, you know, different types of challenges that we thought would be interesting to explore for the future. And we looked at emerging tech. We looked at things that are in development now. My rule for the research team was someone somewhere has to be looking at this idea. It can't just be pie in the sky. Like, wouldn't it be nice if there was no gravity? Or wouldn't it be nice if we could just, snap our fingers and make it rain? But it
Right.
had to be something that was actually actively being researched now that could potentially be deployed in the year 2100.
Hmm.
Um, so that was really interesting. And, Michael was incredible. I mean, at one point he said, he was very, very generous with his time. He really nurtured younger designers and architects in a way that I would like to emulate,
Hmm.
um, and hopefully do. He gave his platform, and enabled younger architects to have a voice, which I think was incredibly generous and powerful.
Amazing.
Um, so from there, we didn't have a huge budget. It was a small, startup publisher. But Michael said, "Well, look, I'll organize a book release for you, book launch." And I presented at the book launch, and then someone invited me to speak somewhere else, and that's how it's happened. We've been on Netflix. Um, we were in a series called "The Future of," the skyscraper episode, and I'm actually in that.
Hmm.
So, you know, things sort of have evolved very naturally. And I just on Sunday presented at the Columbia Climate School for the Climate Justice Summit, which was really
Incredible.
great. We had a presentation of our work in VR.
Wow.
So that's sort of the story, in a nutshell, the story of
Fascinating.
Studioteka Tekamundi.
Fascinating. Fascinating. And the kind of work architects do is always so creative and so amazing. But I've often wondered that how do you balance the aesthetic and the functional aspects of a project while
Well,
considering environmental sustainability?
well, I think that that's very important, and I think that's where my background in economic development and planning comes in, because while I'm a visionary architect, I'm also incredibly practical because I want our visions to be realized. And so I think one of the things that we started doing is um, working with clients who perhaps had a vision, had a larger scale project, had some land, and needed to figure out how to get this done.
Hmm.
And so whenever we're looking at something like that, we also want to think, okay, well, what's the how can we make this project the most sustainable? But also, we have a client, we have somebody who's come to us with a vision and a dream. We
Hmm.
don't want to see them lose their shirt in this thing. It's really important that it be impactful, but that it also be pragmatic, and that it also, you know, if someone's going to invest in it, they need to have a return, right? And so we started doing what I call investment packages. So
Hmm.
people would come to us, and we're doing a couple of them now, and they would say, "Hey, I have this idea, and I need to get funding." And so I would connect them with a funder, and the funder would, or an investor, and the investor would ask me all kinds of really hard questions and maybe even hammer the client on some of the pragmatics of the project. And so seeing the project from that angle, from the business angle, right? From the investment angle, not just from the design and the visionary angle or the client's angle. And the client may end up actually getting ideas from this process and may end up adding different programs or elements than they had even imagined in the first place. That's really how you craft a project. That's how things get done.
Fascinating. And, when I was preparing for my conversation with you, I was amazed to see how sustainability is a core principle of Studioteka Design. How do you approach green and ecologically friendly design in urban environments?
I think that's really the trick, right? Because when we started looking at 2100, a dystopian utopia, we asked ourselves, okay, so I think a while back people were thinking about retreat, right? And I've never been a big fan of retreat. I don't know how familiar you are with that, but it's the idea that humans should move away from areas that are more critically endangered and move towards it. And so you think, well, that's great, but I'm from an island. Where are we supposed to go?
Yeah.
Right. And so there are a lot of people in the global south that are not going to be able to do that. Right. So what we were thinking is that it's actually going to be important to densify. And how can we densify in a way that's sustainable? So what you're seeing behind me is a vision that we have for an area in Johannesburg, South Africa. And so Johannesburg is going to be one of the places that will be relatively okay at 4 degrees. It's not going to be hit by hurricanes. There are probably other issues, but we were looking at things like where are the places on the planet, where are the cities on the planet that could take larger populations, and where are the places that probably would naturally have less population. Like New York we're not envisioning at 4 degrees that is a massive center of population because of having so many storms hitting it at 4 degrees. It's going to be more and more. So in the thing that you're seeing behind me, which I can move out of the way, you have what we're calling a compact megacity, right? So this is something where we are located actually on a site that has it has two sort of pathways for sorry, someone is calling me. It has two pathways for animal migrations, right? Okay. And so we thought to ourselves, how can we as humans just be so selfish that we're going to take over everything? We've already done so much to destroy the planet. Shouldn't we figure out a way of coexisting? So what we started thinking about is, we're architects, so we like to quantify things. We're looking at, wow, if you look at a city, look at all of the surfaces of the city. Look at the roof, not only the roof, but look at the facade. Look at all of those areas that we as humans don't really even need to touch. I mean, when's the last time you went out on your facade? Maybe the biggest interaction you have is on a balcony or something. But nobody is doing a Spider-Man outside the building. So maybe we could give that over to birds, to wildlife, to green, to growing things, because we need more plants. Plants absorb CO2. And we definitely need that. So if we can incorporate more green spaces, not only in our cities, but in and on and around our buildings, we can have something that's a lot more sustainable. So that idea comes from the book, but I've always been interested in that. And even in our traditional architecture practice projects, we will try to guide the client as much as possible towards sustainable solutions in their project, towards the use of sustainable materials, because we believe that it's really important.
Great response. But on the other hand, Vanessa, Johannesburg, you said there is a lot of open area which you've been able to work with. How would you approach the same kind of a design challenge in a densely populated city like New York or Manhattan?
Well, we actually have that in the book.
Okay.
I'm trying to think if I have another background. I might have another background. Hold on a second. Let me change my virtual background to something else. Okay, so this is New York, and I think you're actually going to see a flying car go by at one point. This is a site on the Gowanus Canal in New York. And so what we're imagining is that this area would be the storm capture center of this hemisphere. So we're thinking, okay, and you're seeing disaster packs right here. on the
Right.
underside of some of the infrastructure. So the idea is, can we use our infrastructure? Could we use things like soft edges
Hmm.
to blunt the force of storms? Could we use storm surge barriers? So we have actually at the edge of the waterway, we've got what we call a sponge park. So it's a park that has lots of plants and areas of sort of soft edges that when the waves come can stop them. We
Hmm.
also have a series of sort of locks almost like of storm surge barriers that close as you go up the stream. And by the time you get to where we have our tidal turbine infrastructure that's underneath the water, the wave action is mild enough that we can gather energy from it. And that's the idea, right?
Hmm.
So in terms of, so that's in the book, right? But in terms of sustainability in large scale populations and in dense megacities, actually living in a dense way is, not a dense way, but living in a way that is where we are, in close proximity, we share resources, we share spaces. That's actually very sustainable.
Hmm.
Because then we are leaving other areas open for wildlife, for the rest of the ecosystem. So, actually humans clustering in cities is, just by itself, a
Right.
sustainable thing. In terms of green infrastructure, though, I really believe that we can use, as I mentioned, the facades, the roofs of our buildings. We know for a fact that it has actually an impact on people's well-being to have trees planted in the street, to have access to nature. And so one of the things that we're thinking for year 2100 or year 2180 is that perhaps we don't each need nobody needs McMansions. If you think about college, people really love they romanticize university time. At
Hmm.
least in the US they do, especially if
Yeah.
you go to a university um, where you have a dorm. You think about your dorm, it's not very big. You have a place to sleep, you have a small area where you have your things, and then you have a vast campus that you can
Hmm.
share with everybody else. What if cities could be like that? Maybe people would romanticize and be happy about their lives for more than 4 years,
Right.
right? They would think you would go out, it would be walkable, you could meet your neighbors. So those are some of the things that we think about in terms of sustainability. And of course, there are a whole bunch of technical building systems, MEP types of things that we could go into that make buildings more sustainable.
Yes.
Um, Certainly, I think we could be using our infrastructure for more. One of the things that we look at is, can we use all of this urban space for generating clean energy, for solar, for wind, for all of those things?
Very interesting. And yet, while sustainability is something which are managing well in a big city like New York, the densely populated areas also have inequity in social structures, and there are massive cultural differences.
Yes.
How do you factor in these into your designs?
Well, one of the things that we're thinking about when we asked ourselves this question, and obviously it's a very big site, the world is a huge site. And
Absolutely.
when you take on a project like this, people ask you a lot of questions like the one you've just asked me
Mm.
about, okay, saving the world and all of these issues.
Mm.
And so while I can't purport to solve everything, I could weigh in on it a bit.
Absolutely.
Um, by saying that we're not imagining a world that has vast inequality because we don't think that it's actually sustainable or feasible to go into the climate impacted future that we are creating for ourselves
Mm.
with that type of structure. We think that it's necessary for, and I mentioned the college model. If you think about college, you don't really have huge differences in terms of the dormitories that people have. Um, People have roughly the same amount of space. You don't have the McMansion dormitory and then the kid who's living in a hovel,
Correct.
right? And they're all at the same university. It's a little bit more equitable. Um, as far as, you know, inequality and inequity and poverty and all of those issues are an issue of the sustainability of our planetary system as humans, and they are
Mm.
not sustainable. So we really need to bring everyone along. And that's where my interest lies. I started out in international affairs working and looking at squatter settlements.
Mhm.
So I to squatter settlements in in Mumbai. I've been to Dharavi. I've been to ones in Venezuela. I've been to ones in Jamaica. Um, all over, and spoken with people, and and actually was really inspired. The person who inspired me to be an architect was an architect who was working in a squatter settlement in Cumaná in Venezuela. And I had the opportunity. I was in my international affairs summer work,
Mhm.
and the NGO I was working with said, "Hey, there's this architect. You could go with him. He's going to Cumaná." So we took a tiny plane to this place.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I loved was how much respect and love they had for this architect.
Mhm.
Um, I believe his name was Jose Miguel Menendez. He was incredible. So
Mhm.
it was very inspiring. So we went into the community and people came out of their homes to greet him. And he had taught them to read plans, and they were gently massaging the layout of the community to add in infrastructure. They were not wiping everything away. They
Mhm.
realized that community is more than just putting up a bunch of blocks, right? Cinder block things. And actually, there was one of those cinder block schemes next door. And so he said, "Let me take you to see the pre planned version of how you help the poor." And for lack of a better word, I hate that. But we went there and it was absolutely dead. There was no life, there was no community. And so I realized that the preservation of this community and allowing them to
Mhm.
be a vital part of the upgrade to the settlement was incredibly important. So they were correcting him. They were saying, actually, arquitecto, you have put my house in the wrong place, or
Mhm.
my fence is actually here. And he said, okay, well, we'll correct the plans. And so they were gradually adding in infrastructure. The community was a part of the work. And so that created, it was just very, very inspiring. And we were invited in to have a coffee with folks. And I just felt really, it was an honor to be
Mhm.
invited in, and it was an honor to have their trust.
Yes.
I had a similar experience in Dharavi, and we also went to Mokattam in Cairo, where we met with members of the Zabaleen community, and that was also inspiring. That project, which was it was a collaboration of EQI, Environmental Quality International, and a project called Megacities out of New York. And they did a really, I don't know if you know about this project, but it was incredibly interesting in that 10 years prior to my being there, the community, which was located in the dump, had just a mountain of trash so big in the middle of the street that you couldn't see across the street. And so the fathers and boys would go on donkey carts and they would collect all of the trash of
Mhm.
Cairo, which was growing at a rate of like 1 million people a year or something crazy.
Mhm.
And they would bring it back to the settlement. The women and girls would sort through it, and anything they couldn't use would end up in that mountain in the middle of the street.
Mhm.
By the time I got there, they had turned this place into the recycling center of the city of Cairo. They had gotten trucks for the traditional trash collectors. The boys and girls were able to go to school. And what I saw when I went there was a composting plant. So all of the waste that could be composted is now composted. Do you know how valuable that is in a place like Cairo with sandy soil? There also were plastics recycling, and we toured the plastics recycling plant and met with the
Yes.
owners.
Yeah.
So these types of things are things that are part of my background, and I think about how we can bring everyone along to create just and equitable and sustainable
Hmm.
solutions for cities.
Well
It
said.
means helping everybody to rise up, and to the degree that we can all share our resources rather than having vast inequality as we do in the world
Well said.
today. Sorry if
So
that was a very long.
I have time for one more question for you.
Okay.
What do you believe will be some of the key challenges and opportunities for architects in the next few years?
Well, I think one of the things that's really important for architects is to not um, to not shy away from the big questions and the challenges, right? To not necessarily, I think we've lost a lot of ground as a profession, at least in the US, because we didn't sort of take it on, right? So it ended up turning into other professions. So urban design, that used to be architecture. A lot of the consultants we use used to be part of the expertise of the architect. And so, we find ourselves in a situation where our turf is shrinking and shrinking to be just about aesthetics and design. And I think that aesthetics and design are a wonderful part of that, but it's also important to marry that to solving problems and to really grappling with these things, like I mentioned, the economic impact of a project and sustainability and how that project plugs into the city, and maybe finding innovative solutions for problems that are brought to us by our clients. So, I would say take on more. Um, Even if you don't 100% know the answer, trust your passion and your ability to visualize the future and visualize solutions as a way forward to really using your profession in a way that can benefit the world.
Very well said. And on that note, Vanessa, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me. I think um, the kind of work that architects are doing, and I've been reading a lot about what's happening in different parts of the world. I'm fascinated with what is happening in Saudi Arabia when they talk of the Murabba. I'm fascinated whenever I go to Dubai and look at the amazing work they're doing there. I look at all the amazing stuff going on in our own country with sustainability coming in, green buildings coming all over the place. And there's a lot of work being done on slum development. But I think this conversation with you has given me a very, very new perspective on your work on Studioteka Design and Tekamundi, and about how you, as a young architect, are really being able to put together some amazingly important needs of humanity into livable spaces. I love the two screens that you have just showed us, the one before from Johannesburg, and this one that you got right now from New York. But thank you again for speaking to me, and all the very best to you.
Thank you so much, Ashutosh. It's been an honor.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.